va'osio shel Torah. So Rabbi Shua says between every single dibra, diktukev va'osio shel Torah. But this is actually really incredible. This is in between each of the dibros, in between each of the commandments. So you had the commandment, and in between each of the commandments were all of the various details, concerning each of the particular dibros, right? The ability to go ahead and it's almost like the Rashi, right? So if you can imagine, in between each of the dibros, so you have all of the details concerning that particular dibra. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, "Dichsiv mimuloim betarshish kiyama," because the pasuk says that the luchos were filled like the sea of Tarshish, which indicates to us that not only were the 10 Commandments actively on the luchos, but rather what else was there? Amazingly enough, what else was there? Was all of the details. So also, if you could imagine having a dibra and then all of the associated halachos concerning that dibra on there. Rava, so the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Kad Hava Mati Hadin Karya, when Reish Lakish would come to this particular pasuk, he would say, Hava Amar Yafa Lamdani Chananya Achi Rabbi Yoshua. Mahayam Azeh ben Gal Godol Legal Godol Golim Kitanim. Kach bein kol dibor v'dibor v'diktu kevos yoseh shel Torah. So just like about saying in the ocean, when you have waves, and in between each large wave is a smaller wave. So to say such a beautiful imagery. So too, if you imagine that each wave represents one of the dibros, one of the commandments, in between each of the larger waves were smaller waves of perush, smaller waves of explanation, to explain ultimately the particular dibra. Incredible. Amar Rabbi Tanchuma, is kashyas kumei rapinchas asik Rabbi Yehuda, well asik Rabbi Meir. So I'll say the Gemara now points out something very interesting. Going back yesterday, if you remember again, to the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir concerning the dimensions and measurements of the Aron. So we'll say the Gemara is going to point out, we spoke this out yesterday, but one of the interesting major nafkaminas between their approaches was, where was the Sefer Torah positioned? Remember again, there was a Sefer Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote. Where was it placed? Was it placed inside of the ark? Was it placed outside of the ark? This was a major machlokes. So says the Gemara, my time Rabbi Yehuda, the chsev lakoach hasefer Torah zeh v'samtem osu mitzat aron bris Hashem. So also Rabbi Yehuda's position is pretty clear, right? Rabbi Yehuda holds the halacha l'maaseh. You take the Torah and you place it inside of the Aron. That's hence Rabbi Yehuda's dimensions. The Gemara says, Al daite Rabbi Yehuda du amar heichan hava sefer Torah nasun kimin gluskia sulomi bachutz. So also according to Rabbi Yehuda, ultimately again, where was I'm sorry. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Torah uses lashon of mitzad Aron, on the side of the Aron. So therefore, the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, where was the Torah placed? There was a gluskia sulam b'chutz. There was some type of gluskia. Literally means like a box, but in fact, what it actually means is a shelf. Right? There was some type of shelf-like protrusion on the side of the Aron, upon which the Torah was placed. So the Gemara says, Al daiti Rabbi Yehuda du amar heichan sefer Torah naskum is fine. The Gemara says, Al sefer Torah nasum b'socho. My time with Rabbi Meir. What was Rabbi Meir's logic? Tichsiv v'nasata sakaporis ala aron milamala ve'el ha'aron titin esaidos asher etin elecha. So we'll say, so Rabbi Meir says, the Torah says pretty explicitly that you'll place the Torah inside of the ark, and you shall place the kaporis, the lid on top of the ark. Al daite, now he changes it over here. The Gra changes this to Rabbi Huda. Al daite Rabbi Huda du amar ein muktam umu'uchar b'Torah ela ve'ela aron titin asaidos asher etin elecha ve'achar kach v'nasata sakapores ala aron milamala. So therefore, again, ultimately, what you'll have to say is that Allah Chalamaysa, the pasuk is not written in order, and what it means is only after there was the Sefer Torah do you go ahead and insert it inside of the Aron. Do you place the lid on top of the Aron? Rabbi Pinchas, B'Shem Lakish, Hatar Shnas L'Hakadosh Baruch Hu L'Moshe. So we'll say, so therefore again, before we end this particular section, there's the fundamental machlokus about where the Sefer Torah was placed. Was there room for the Sefer Torah inside of the Aron or not? Machlokis Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. The Gemara ends off with a beautiful idea. HaTorah shenasan, HaTorah shenasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. The Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, nasna lo ish levana charusa be'ish shchora. Literally, again, it was given ish levana, white fire, charusa. Charusa literally means inscribed on black fire. Yesh muvleles. This is an ish that is mixed together. Beish chatsuva me'ish. Ultimately, again, a fire hewn out from fire. V'nesuna me'ish, and given from fire. Dichsiv mimino ish das lamo. So we'll say an incredible fire imagery from Kabbalah Satorah. Torah is given white fire inscribed onto black fire, fire that comes from fire, fire mixed together with fire. If you look at the Karban Ha'ida for just a moment on the right side, he says, Ish Lavana, Heim Ha'osios, Chakukim al Gabe Ish Chora, Vainu Ksav Libuna, Inami Behefech Vuke Ksav Shalanu. So we'll say it's interesting, because if you look at the Lasson of the Gemara says, Nasla Ish Lavana Charusa Be'ish Chora, which sounds like, right, white fire inscribed on black fire. Sounds like the print, the words. The words are white fire inscribed on a backdrop, ultimately of black fire. So the Karban Ha'ida says it could have also been the opposite. It could have been black fire inscribed on white fire, which resembles the Sefer Torah that we have today, right? The black ink, right? The black letters on the white parchment backdrop. Either way, says the Karban Ha'ida, the metaphor is the same, which is that the Torah was given in a form of fire. So I just point out, according to the second approach of the Karban Ha'ida, that it's really black letters, black fire inscribed on white fire. How incredible is that? You'll never look at the Sefer Torah the same again. That every single time I open up the Sefer, ultimately, again, what I'm looking at is black fire inscribed on white fire. What's the metaphor? See, I say the power of the flame, and the reason why the flame occupies such a prominent place. Ultimately, again, in we'll call it the spiritual metaphorical realm, is because the Ish is constantly flickering upwards. The Ish represents constant growth. The Ish, the flame, is never stagnant. It's never the same flame day after day. It's always changing. It's always evolving. It's always reaching. It's always going out, going sideways. That's the metaphor for Ruchnius, right? How was the Torah given? The Torah was given white fire on black fire, fire mixed together, fire, 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 fire. Because do you want to know what success in Torah is? Success in Torah is perpetual growth. And it's growth, interestingly enough, in every direction, just like the Ish. Incredible. Vosai Mishnah. Hechan hayu ishtachaviyos. Where were the prostrations done? Oh, you know what I just realized? I didn't WhatsApp you. Let me just send this out now so you could also take a look at this while we are. Hopefully make things a little bit easier. Sorry. Okay. Good. I'm sending you two things actually. Oh. Okay, good. All right, so now we can begin the Mishnah again. You don't need it yet, but like this, you'll be able to reference it easily when we need it. Says the Mishnah. Most remember again in the previous Mishnah we learned that there were 13 prostrations, 13 prostration places inside of the Mikdash. So where were they? So the Gemara said, Arba b'tzafon, 4 in the north, Arba b'darab, 4 in the south, Shalosh b'mizrach, 3 in the east, Ubeis b'marav, and 2 in the west. Kineged shlosha asar sha'arim deromim, smuchim l'marav. So we'll say this corresponds ultimately to the 13 gates of the Beis HaMikdash. So you can see that in the image I just sent you, 13 different gates in the Beis HaMikdash. The Mishnah is actually going to go through them. So the Gemara says, so the Sharid Romium Smuch L'Marav, so the southern gate, which were near the west. So the Gemara says, Shara Elyon, we call the upper gate, Shar HaDelek, literally the kindling gate. And I've also, we're going to see Shara Delek was called that way because it was actually near the Lishkas Dir Ha'itzim. It was by the wood chamber. The Tiklin Chadatin mentions this over Shar Laka Shalishkas Ha'etzim. Right? It was right by the chamber for the wood. That's why it's called the chamber. That's why it's called the gate of kindling. Shar HaBechoros. So we'll say, so again, the Tiklin Chadatin says this is where they would go in and bring in the firstborn animals. Shar HaMayim, we'll discuss that in just a moment. Shmo Shar HaMayim. What was it called Shar HaMayim? So we'll say most of these gates were named in very simple ways. They were descriptive names. They were descriptive names that ultimately, again, really focused on their use, or perhaps focused on someone who had donated something, right? That practice is time immemorial. So the Gemara goes right there. So why do they call it Sharamayim? Shabo machnisin sluchis top of Yudzayin sluchis shel nisuch hamayim b'chag, because it was through that gate that they would bring in the jug of water for the nisuch hamayim. Nisuch hamayim was the process, the water libation that they performed on Sukkot. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Bo hamayim mifachim v'asidin lios yotzin mitachas miftan habayis. Interestingly enough, also we're going to see that in the Messianic era, there is going to be a stream which emanates from the Kodesh HaKadoshim and extends outward. So that stream is going to emanate from this area called Shar HaMayim. Lu'umasan b'tzafon. What about the gateways on the north? So the Gemara says, Smuchim Amarav, that also were more situated towards the west. Shar Yechanya, the gate of Yechanya, which we'll talk about. Shar HaKarban, Shar HaNoshim, Shar HaShir. The Lama Nikra Shmo Shar Yechanya. So we'll say the names of the other gates are kind of pretty self-explanatory. But why do they call the gate of Shar Yechanya Yechanya? We'll remember again, we spoke about Yechanya in yesterday's daf. Why do we call it? We'll say this is so profound. Shebo Yatze Yechanya Begaluso. Because this was the gate that Yechanya left the last time he left the Beis Midrash. Also remember again, Yechanya was the king exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. Remember again, we have this pasuk in Megillas Esther. Asher hagloim hagolah, asher haglasa melech Yechanya. Right? This is, so Yechanya was, this is time of Mordechai Tzaddik. This is Pesachia. This is all the same time frame. So they named that gate Shar Yechanya because when Nebuchadnezzar came to exile the king, we're going to see the king was exiled first. He left the Beis Hamikdash through Shar Yechanya. What's a dramatic story, which we'll actually see in today's daf. So the Gemara says, B'mizrach, Shemizrach, Shar Nikanor. In the east was the gate of Nikanor. So we'll say, here's an example of a gate named after the person. Remember again, Nikanor, as we'll discuss also, donated the doors, donated beautiful doors to the Beis Hamikdash, and as such, again, that gate, in which had his doors, they named Shar Nikanor. Shnei Pashmishin Hayulo, Echad Miyamino ve'echad Mismolo. So we'll say in Shar Nikanor, just by the way, the Gemara says, there were two small doors in the larger door, one on the right, one on the left. Shnei Memarav, two gates in the west. V'lo haya lahem shem. So this is interesting. The two gates in the west were unnamed. They were unnamed. They just didn't have names. Okay, Mishnah. Masnisin Abba Yosa ben Yochanan he. The Amar Keneged Yud Gimel Sharim. Baram Kira'abanon Shiva Sharim Hayu Ba'azara. So what's interesting enough, the Gemara says that it's a machlokes actually how many gates there were. All right, according to Abba Yosa ben Yochanan, he goes with the opinion, which seems to be the majority opinion, that in fact there were 13 gates, but yet the Rabbanon hold that there were only 7 gates. Interesting machlokes. So the Gemara says Shiva Sharim Hayu Ba'azara. So we'll say, so what's interesting about this is as follows. So remember again, you read the Mishnah, and no one is arguing on the number of prostrations. So our Mishnah links the number of prostrations corresponding to the number of gates. But it doesn't. But nowhere do we have a recorded machlokes that the Rabbanon disagree with the number of prostrations, even though they disagree with the number of gates. So how do the Rabbanon, who only hold that there are 7 gates, arrive at 13 prostrations? So the Gemara says, Kiyahi ditaninon taman, as we learned, Yirgimel pratzos hayubo shepirtsum malche yavan v'chazru v'gardum b'nei chashmonoi. The gazru kinegdan Yud Gimel Ishtachavo. So we'll say, so remember again, according to the Rabbanon, there are 13 breaches. We'll say, interestingly enough, right outside of the major temple compound, there was something called the Chel. The Chel was an enclosed, fenced-in area, and it was enclosed by the Serug. So the Serug was like a fence that went around. The Yevanim had breached that fence in 13 places, and the Chashmonaim repaired those breaches. So according to the Rabbanan, amazingly enough, the 13 prostrations corresponded to the 13 filled-in breaches that the Chashmonaim filled in. So quite beautiful. The Gazru Kinegdon, Yud Gimel Shtachavos. Ksiv, Vayaba Yamahu. So we'll say good. So that's why everyone is agreeing on the number of prostrations, even if they're disagreeing ultimately again on how you get to that particular number. So this is quite beautiful. The Mishnah made reference to this idea that in the Messianic era there's going to be a stream, right? Shar HaMayim. Why is it called Shar HaMayim? So you have machlokes. One opinion in the Mishnah said it's called Shar HaMayim because halacha l'maisa, that's where you would bring in the water for the Nisuch HaMayim. Second opinion says it's called Shar HaMayim because in the Messianic era there is going to be a large stream which runs through this area. So I'll say here we're going to speak about this stream, which is really quite amazing. So the Gemara says, will be on that day that literally again, Mayim Chaim, a body of water will come out of Yerushalayim. So we'll say, of course, you understand how miraculous this is. Yerushalayim has no bodies of water, right? Remember again, we spoke that Yerushalayim has the Gichon spring, right? If you ever go in the Ir David, City of David tour, right? And you go in the tunnel tours and you go ahead and you walk through the water. You're walking through the Gichon spring. That's the underground spring in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, Tani, here we go. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, in the Messianic era, there will be a body of water that begins in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. How incredible is this? Begins in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it'll eventually branch out. From the Kodesh HaKadoshim, ad HaParoches, up until the curtain, kekarne sile v'kile, which means literally, it'll be like the antenna of snails. In other words, the river will extend, but it'll be tiny. It'll be tiny. Min Paroches ad Mizbeach Hazav, from the curtain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim until the Mizbeach Hazav. So remember again, the Mizbeach Hazav is the incense altar inside of the Mikdash. Kekarne Chagavim. It'll be like the antenna of locusts. So still thin, but a little bit thicker. The Mizbeach Hazav v'ad Azaros, from the golden internal altar for Ketores until the Azaros, until the courtyard. Kechut shel shasi. It'll be like the warp thread. And from the Azaros until the entrance to the Beis Hamikdash, it'll be like the wolf thread. I'll say after that, it's going to turn into a large sea. Ad Korsala. So we'll say, so the Gemara now is going to break down this pasuk that the Gemara is quoting from Yecheskel, where Yecheskel describes this great sea that is going to exist in Yerushalayim. We'll say, but interestingly enough, the sea itself never gets wider than the wolf thread inside of the Beis Hamikdash compound, which makes sense. You want to have water, but you're not going to have a body of water. Also, again, remember, I want to point out, they already have water in the Beis Hamikdash. I mean, they had water in the Beis Hamikdash. We learned about this. Remember again, where do we learn about this? In Pesachim, right? Remember again, on Erev Pesach, after the entire Azara was filled with blood, everything else, from the shechting of the karbanos, they had a drain. They plugged up the drain and they unleashed water, or they let out. They unleashed a strong word, right? They went ahead and they flooded the Azara. So they already had a way to pipe in water. What the Navi Yecheskel is describing is a stream which will ultimately develop into an ocean. So the Gemara says the first part of the ocean after the Beis Hamikdash goes up to the ankles. Then it goes up to the knees. Then it goes up literally again. Masnia literally means the loins. So the sea, this sea being described in the Messianic era, gets progressively deeper. After that, the sea will get so big that even a large ship will not be able to traverse. My time, what's the reason? Even a mighty vessel will not be able to traverse it. Ultimately, again, because the water will be so great, mei shachu. What's the Gemara says? Ma'u mei shachu, mei latush. It'll be so great that even a person won't be able to swim across it. Amrav Chuna, ba'asrin karu l'shaita shchuna. Because by us, we call swimming shchuna. Uparash yadav b'kerbo kasher yafish hashocha lishchos ma'u lishchos. Amrav Yosi b'Rabbi Bun mayon dimis malalin ba'alma. It'll be water that is spoken about in the world. That's how vast the sea will become. Ksiv, Bayomu yemakam niftach lebeis David, uliyoshi Yerushalayim lechatos ulenida. So we'll say, watch this. Rishon Manachem b'shem Rabbi Yonasan, mi beis David ad yoshvei Yerushalayim kasherim lenida. From the house of David, which means right from the palace of David HaMelech to the place where the residents of Yerushalayim live. Ultimately, the waters will be deep enough and wide enough and large enough for tevilah, for anida, and for chatos. Chatos means paraduma. Mikan ve'ilach mei ta'arov eseim kshem l'nida upsulam mechatos. We'll say, remember again, for para aduma, you could only use spring water. Mayim chayim. You can't use rainwater. For anida, you could use rainwater or spring water. Either one is fine. So apparently the Gemara describes over here that the stream, the larger body of water, from the house of David HaMelech until the residents of Yerushalayim, that will be more like a spring, and therefore will be kosher for tevilah, for anida, as well as for paraduma. Mikan ve'ilach, after you get out of the residential area of Yerushalayim, meitaru v'seim, it'll be a mixture of rainwater and spring water. Kshem l'nida upsum lechatas. It'll be usable for nida, but not usable for chatas, for paraduma. Rabbi Lazar, b'beis David Yerushalayim kshem l'nida ulechatas. Mikan ve'ilach me katfarios or katafrisos. Hein psul l'nida ulechatos. Okay, second opinion says no. Literally, again, it'll be the sloping water, running water, right? Water that runs off a slope. So it won't be usable for nida or for chatos. Ksivi ve'yomer le'amayim ha'ela yotzim el ha'galila ha'kadmona. Zel yam shasam. So we'll say, so okay, so the Gemara is going to talk about other bodies of water in just a moment. But I just want to point out, it's really quite fascinating. So you see over here that the Messianic era is described, right? How is the Messianic era described? One of the ways, in an abundance of water. An abundance of water. So I will say, remember, what does water represent? Water represents Torah. Mayim is Torah. Mayim is Ruchnius. Of course, on a meta, does it literally mean that when Mashiach comes, so Yerushalayim is going to become waterfront property? I'm sure the residents of Yerushalayim would be very happy with that, right? Everybody loves waterfront property, right? Does it mean that in the Messianic era there's going to be an incredible tidal wave of spirituality? So again, I just want to point out, if you go with the idea that it's a tidal wave of spirituality, that water represents spirituality, water represents ruchnius, so then you see something really amazing, which is just in one blot of Gemara, you see ruchnius represented by two dramatically different things. You see ruchnius represented by fire, and ruchnius represented by water, right? Because really, both water and fire really do two different things, right? Fire, the metaphor of fire represents the metaphor of constant growth, the metaphor of constant evolution, the metaphor of constant change. The fire never remains the same. The fire is always jumping upwards, always jumping sidewards, always wanting to accomplish, always wanting to take over. Water, on the other hand, is the great sustainer. Water is the great sustainer, right? Without water, right? Mayim is chayim. So without water, so without ruchnius, so we'll say, sometimes we look at spirituality or spiritual growth as a nice pursuit. In general, anything in life you look at as a nice pursuit doesn't usually happen. Ruchnius is not a nice pursuit. Ruchnius is life. Ruchnius is life. Without Ruchnius, there is no life, or at least not a life worth living. Ruchnius is water. So without it, I literally cannot live. Without it, I don't want to live. So therefore, water, so if you have Ruchnius, what's also interesting about water, the fascinating about water, especially large bodies of water, is there are many undiscovered things which lurk in the depths. The more a person develops spiritually, the more a person develops a depth to them as well. And it's a powerful thing to develop a depth, to not just be a superficial person who kind of hovers on the surface, but to develop a depth to my personality. So that's Ruchnius as water, Ruchnius as fire. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Vayomer Elai Amayim Ha'ela Yotzim Ela Lilah Kalmona Zel Yam Shel Samchu. So this pasuk is referring to the sea of Samchu. V'yardu Ala Rava Ze Yam Shel Tiberia. So we'll say this is the same pasuk. It's just talking about the body of water. The body of water is actually incredible. The body of water which comes out of Yerushalayim will connect with other bodies of water, which is really amazing. So it'll connect with the sea of Samchu. It will connect with the Kinneret, Yam Shel Tiberia. Ubal Hayama Ze Yam HaMelach. El Yam HaMotzim Ze Yam HaGadol. It'll go to Yam HaMelach, right to the Dead Sea. It'll go to Yam HaGadol, to the Mediterranean. The Lama Nikra Shmo. Motzim Kineged Shnei Pamim Shiyatza Echan. I will say, why is this sea called the Yam HaMotzim, right? El Yam HaMotzim, because there are 2 times that this sea overran itself, or extended beyond its borders. Echa B'dar Enosh, one time in the generation of Enosh, Be'echa B'dar Haflaga, and one time during the generation of dispersion. Dar Enosh is the Mabul. So the Rabbi Eliezer B'Shena B'Chananya Berishona Yatza Ad Calabria. The first time that the waters overran their banks, they went to Calabria. Obishnia at Kipe Barbaria. Well, say Kipe Barbaria actually is the Barbary coast, right? They extended out to the Barbary coast. Barishoni Yatza at Kipe Barbaria. Obishnia Yatza at Akko. The Ad Yafo. Ad Po. So the Gemara says. So again, just talking about when you had episodes in history where the water overran its banks, where did it go to? So the Gemara says till Akko, till Yafo, Kipi Barbaria. So the Gemara says Ad Po Tava V'lo Sosif, until here the waters could come and no further. So the Gemara says, quoting over here the pasuk in Eov, Ad Akko Tava V'lo Sosif. The waters could go until Akko, but no more. Upo Yoshis Bigaon Galecha, and here it will come with its mighty waves. Ad Yafo Oshis Gaon Galecha, until Yafo the mighty waves could come. Necha Yama Rava Amar V'Yama Demilcha B'Shvil Miskan. So we'll say, I understand ultimately again why the sea in Yerushalayim, when it extends, will go to the Great Sea, and will also come to the Yama Demilcha, the Dead Sea. Because I will say the power is that when that river in Yerushalayim extends to the Dead Sea, what will it do? B'Shila Miskan, it'll make the salty waters of the Dead Sea sweet. I will say, isn't this incredible? That not only will there be a body of water that extends out of Yerushalayim, but that body of water is going to connect with all of these other bodies of water, and at least in the form of the Dead Sea, it'll make it sweet. Yama de Tveria, Yama de Samchul Rabos de Gasam. We'll say, but why does the water source in Yerushalayim have to go ahead and connect with the Yam of Samchu or the Yam of Tiveria, which are already quote unquote sweet waters? L'rabos tigasam. Ultimately, again, to increase their supply of fish. Pretty incredible. So we'll say, the idea is any body of water which connects with the waters of Yerushalayim will experience incredible blessing. Most notably a proliferation in their fish species. One time I went to Tzidon, Shimon Gamliel says, So Shimon Gamliel says, one time I went to Tzidon, to Sidon, and I served me fish, and there are more than 300 types of fish on one platter. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "V'nir pu'u hamayim b'tzesav v'gabav lo yirapu lemelach." So the Gemara says, "Lemelach nitanu ksivenir pu'u hamayim v'at amrit v'lo yir pu'u hamayim." So we have contradictory psukim. On one hand, the pasuk says that the waters will become sweet when this body of water of Yerushalayim touches them, but then it also says the waters will not become nir pu'u, means healed. They won't become sweet. So which one is it? Will the waters become sweet or not become sweet? So the Gemara says it's talking about 2 different bodies of water. Makam hu ushmo lo yirpu. Both say the waters will become sweet, except there's one body of water that's called lo yirpu. It will not become sweet. Why don't you want the body of water to become sweet? For that is the area from which we will derive salt. See, interestingly enough, the waters will become sweet, except you're going to have salt ponds. There'll be salt ponds which will remain, which will be there ultimately again for us to have salt. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Ksiv balanachal yala asvaso mizeh umizeh kol itzma cholo yibo alei v'lo yitem period lechadashav yivaker." So we'll say now the Gemara switches gears for just a moment. Now, after we finish talking about the body of water which is going to extend through Mishram in the Messianic era, and how that body of water is going to impact all of the other bodies of water, which I will say, what is that a reference to? Kimi Tzion Teitzei Torah U'Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. The idea again, Mayim is Torah, Mayim is Ruchnius. In the Messianic era, with the rebuilt Beis Hamikdash, what is going to happen? The waters of Yerushalayim are going to touch all of the other waters. And what are they going to do to all the other waters? They're going to sweeten them. They're going to sweeten them. Incredible, incredible idea. So we'll say now the Gemara switches gears to another aspect of the Messianic era. Tani Am Rabbi Yehuda. Lefisha, the Gemara over here quoted the pasuk from Yechezkel, and the pasuk in Yechezkel speaks about Kol eitz ma'achal lo yibol aleu. In the Messianic era, no fruit tree will ever have its leaves wither. V'lo yitam piryo lechadashav yivaker, and the fruit will not stop. Every month the tree will birth fruit. So what does this mean? So Tani Rabbi Yehuda, both says incredible. In this world means the pre-Messianic era. So what happens? So it takes 6 months, for the earth to produce wheat, and trees only produce fruit once a year, right? Remember, the earth could actually produce wheat twice a year. You could have summer wheat and winter wheat. But fruit trees only produce fruit once every 12 months. Avala asid lavo, get ready for this. First wide line in Zayin with Aleph. Avala asid lavo, hatvua osa lechodesh echad, ve'ilan osa l'shnei chadashim. We'll say, isn't this incredible? But in the future, the Messianic era, the tavua, the wheat will go ahead and be produced every month, and the Elon will go ahead and produce fruit once every 2 months. My taima l'chadashav yivaker. We'll say incredible. So in the Messianic era, accelerated produce, accelerated agriculture. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi, lefi sheva olam hazeh tvua osa l'shisha chadashim v'ilan osa l'yud beis chodesh. So Rabbi Yossi says same thing. Right now, the earth produces wheat twice a year, but fruit trees produce fruit once a year. Avala asid lavo hatvua osa tesvav yom. Listen to this. In the Messianic era, wheat will be produced every 15 days, ve'ilan osa l'chodesh, and the trees will produce fruit once a month. Shekin matzinu shasa hatvua b'mei yoel l'chamisha sayom v'karav mimenu ha'omer. As well, so we see this happen already once in the times of Yoel, where ultimately, again, the earth produced wheat once every 15 days, right? Once every 15 days, and they brought from into Kabar Omer. My taimo, O b'nei Tzion, Gilu v'simchu b'Hashem Elokechem, kinasan lachem es hamor l'tzdaka, vayored lachem, geshem more u'malkosh b'rishon. Ma mekayim Rabbi Yossi l'chadashav yivaker, b'chol chodesh v'kodesh yem mivaker. So we'll say again, some machlokas exactly about the accelerated pace of Messianic agriculture. But also, I want to tell you something amazing. Do you realize what happens, by the way, if the world does that? If the world produces wheat every 15 days and fruit trees produce once a month, or even in the slower schedule, we'll say, you know that could mean an end to global hunger? That could mean that there's enough food supply to mamish feed the entire world. You know why you daven for Mashiach? See, about say sometimes people think we daven for Mashiach because we'll get back to Beis Hamikdash. That is true. That is very true. But getting back to Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash is incredible, and we yearn and we pine for it every day. But the Beis Hamikdash is one facet of the Messianic redemption. But we'll say, can you imagine a world with no hunger? Can you imagine, again, I will say, we're not used to talking about hunger because, Baruch Hashem, that's not usually the acute issue within our communities. But it is an acute issue in greater society. So can you imagine a world where there's no hunger? Can you imagine a world where everyone has what to eat because the earth is producing at a much faster output? Can you imagine that? And can you imagine what that means for civilization? Can you imagine what that means for the happiness factor of mankind? Can you imagine what it probably means for the shalom of mankind? That's why you daven for Mashiach, because it represents an end to the challenges which have marked humanity for all time. It's so incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. And ultimately, again, its leaves will heal. Rabbi Yochanan Omer Terafea Meitzitz Allah. So I'll say Rabbi Yochanan says in the Messianic era, ultimately, again, the trees, right? Even the leaves of the trees will heal. The Teraf Mazona, but it means that the leaf will be consumed as food, and it will heal as food. What does this mean? Rav Ushmuel, Chadamar lahatir peshalamala, the Chadamar lahatir peshalamaton. So someone said in the Messianic era, even the leaves will have therapeutic benefits. Some will say that if you eat the leaves, it'll increase your appetite. That's peshalamala. Others will say if you're constipated, it'll help ease the bowels. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Chadecha lahatir pe'akaros, v'chad amar lahatir pe'ilma. We'll say incredible Gemara. Some say in the Messianic era, the leaves will be so powerful that, again, if a woman is barren, so again, the leaves will allow the womb to open up. Others will say if a person is mute, ultimately, again, the leaves, the Messianic leaves, will allow the person to speak. We'll say so much to look forward to and so much to daven for. Ulu masam b'tzafan. So the Gemara says, at Motzer, both is an incredible Gemara, incredible, overwhelming Gemara. Bishar sha'ala Nebuchadnezzar lekan. When Nebuchadnezzar came, was marching on Eretz Yisrael. Ba v'yashav lo b'dofnei shel Antochia. He set up his camp by the walls of Antochia. V'yatza Sanhedrin gedola likraso. The Sanhedrin Agadol went out to greet Nebuchadnezzar. Amrulo. Higiyaz man habayis zele charev. We'll see here this exchange. The members of the Sanhedrin asked Nebuchadnezzar, "Are you here to destroy the Beis Hamikdash? Has the time for the destruction come?" Amar lahem. Nebuchadnezzar says, "I'm not going to destroy right now, but what I want is as follows: Osa shemlachti aleichem tneuli. The one who I installed as king, I want you to go ahead and hand him over to me." Remember again, this goes back to yesterday. Remember, who's the king? Yechanya. But remember again, Nebuchadnezzar renamed him. What did Nebuchadnezzar name him? Tzidkiyahu. Right? Nebuchadnezzar said, if you rebel against me, God will judge you. Hand over Yechanya. Vani holech. And I will leave you alone for now. Bova amar liYoyachin, Melech Yehuda. They came and they told Yechanya, right? The king of Yehuda, Nebuchadnezzar boilach. Nebuchadnezzar wants you. Kevan sheshama mehen kach. When Yechanya heard that now Nebuchadnezzar was requesting him, Yechanya understood that this was the end. So this was the end. Not just the end of him, he also understood this was the end of the Beis Midrash. Also listen to this gripping Gemara. So what did he do? Natal maftecho shal Beis Hamikdash. Allah legago shal heichal. He took the keys to the Beis Hamikdash. He went to the roof of the Beis Hamikdash. Amar levan ribono shel olam l'sha'avar hayinu ne'emanim lecha. It used to be that you believed in us. It used to be that you trusted us. V'hayu maftechosecha mesurin lanu. And the keys to your Beis Hamikdash were given over to us. Achshav she'ein anu ne'emanim. Now that you clearly no longer trust us to watch over your Beis Hamikdash. Hare maftechosecha misurin lecha. I hereby give your keys back to you. We'll say, who could imagine that moment when Yehoiachin, the king of Yehuda, gives back the keys of the Mikdash to the Ribono Shel Olam? Shrei Amorain. There's a machlokes. What happened next? Chad Amar Zarkon va'od lo yardu. Some say he threw them up to Shemayim and they did not come back down. V'chad Amar ba'ak min yad v'nat Lasson yadon. Others say a hand extended down from the heavens and took the keys from Yechanya's hand. Both say this was the end. This was the end. When you have to give back the keys of the Beis Hamikdash to the Ribono Shel Olam, when we're no longer trusted to be the custodians of the Ribono Shel Olam's home, this was the end of Bayis Rishon. Kevan Shero, so Yechanya gives back the keys, and Rabbi say Yechanya gives himself over to Nebuchadnezzar, because obviously, again, if Nebuchadnezzar was willing to leave Klal Yisrael alone for now, Yoyachin gave himself back. Kevan Shero, Amadeus, Kevan Shero, Chori Yehuda, Cain, I will say, as soon as the noblemen of Yehuda saw what had happened, this is such a tragic story. Alu l'rosh gagosein, they went to the top, their rooftops, v'naflu umesu. I will say, naflu literally means they fell, but it means is they threw themselves off. They threw themselves off the rooftops umesu. Hadu d'chsiv masagay chizayim malacha ifo ki alisa kula legagos. So we'll say really an incredibly dramatic Gemara. And now, kind of to loop it back, that's why it's called Shar Yechanya. Because we'll say, now you understand it. That's the gate. That the last thing Yechanya does is he gives back the keys to the Ribono Shel Olam. After he gives back the keys, he walks out that gate. and he delivers himself into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. That gate was called Shar Yechanya, for that was the gate that Yechanya left the Beis Hamikdash. Incredible, Abba. Incredible. Says the Mishnah. Let's go a little bit weiter. Says the Mishnah. Yir Gimel Shulchanos. I will say, I just want to point out, I know we do these Gemaras very quickly, but again, I would urge you, certainly study them more on your own. There's also a ton of perushim on the page, each of which give their own insights into all of these maisalach, which are incredible. Says the Mishnah, there were 13 tables in the Beis Hamikdash. Ches shal shayish, 8 of them made of marble, the Beis Matbachim, in the slaughter chamber. Right? So we'll say, again, this Kishmo Kenu, this was the area where they would pretty much take apart the animals. Shalei and madich and sakir b'ayim. So I'll say on these eight tables of marble, that's where they would literally madich and sakir means they would wash the insides of the animal. Marble is good because marble remains cold, right? And because it remains cold, that way again the meat itself doesn't heat up and lead to spoilage. Beis B'marav, 2 tables in the west. I'm sorry, B'marav HaKevesh, right? 2 tables to the west of the ramp. Echad shel shayish ve'echad shel kesef. 1 made of marble, 1 made of silver. Al shel shayish no sinis ha'ibarim. On the marble one, they would put the limbs of the animal. V'al shel kesef kli sharis. And on the silver one, they would put the service utensils. Ubeiz bu'ulam mibifnim. 2 tables, I will say, on the ulam, on the inside. Now, remember, ulam literally means the antechamber. So this is now, the tables that we're speaking about until now were outside of the Beis Midrash. Remember again, there's the Beis Hamikdash compound, which is comprised of the courtyards and the structure, and then there's the ulam, the azar, the ulam, the kodesh hakadoshim, which is the actual, call it, building of the mikdash. So now the Gemara says there were 2 tables inside of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, al pesach habayis, the entranceway, achel shel shayis ve'achel shel zav, 1 made of marble, 1 made of gold. Al shal shayish nostim lechem apanim michnisaso. So I'll say, interestingly enough, on the marble table, that's where they would put the new loaves of bread. So when they would bake the lechem apanim, take it out of the oven, they would first place it on a table of marble. Al shal zav biyitziaso. But ultimately, again, then they have another table. They have another table of gold. Now, both say, I want to point out, this is not talking about the shulchan right now, right? The shulchan itself, right, the actual shulchan upon which lechem apanim was situated, was actually put inside of the kodesh. This is talking about when you would take the bread out of the oven and get ready to arrange it. You'd put it on a marble table, right? Then they'd arrange it on the shulchan. Then when you would take it off the shulchan to give it out to Khan, they would put it once again on a gold table. So the Gemara says, "Shemalin b'kodesh v'lo moridin," because ultimately again we go up in kedusha, we don't get down. So both say, interestingly enough, the process for lechem apanim comes out of the oven, goes onto a marble table, then gets arranged on the formal shulchan inside of the kodesh. That's the shulchan with the 12 stacks. Then when it's taken off the shulchan, it's once again put on another golden table, because you can't go back, right? Once you had gold, you can't go back to marble. Malin b'kodesh ve'in moridin. The Gemara says, echad shal zav mibifnim sha'alav alechem apanim tamid. And there was 1 table inside of the kodesh, which is what we call the shulchan. The kli shari is called the shulchan, and that was the table upon which the alechem apanim was situated. Incredible. So Tani, Al shel kasef, Rabbi Yossi B'Shem B'Shol, Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Chanina, Mati Ba B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan, less kan shel kasef. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is as follows. The Gemara says, if you take a look at the Karban Ha'ida, Tani al shel kasef, Osan shel ulam, Echad haya shel kasef, ve'echad shel zav, al shel kasef. So we'll say there's an alternate version. Remember again, the last part of the Mishnah. In the last part of the Mishnah said, there were 2 tables. We'll say, just if you could imagine, the ulam, right? The ulam, the Beis Hamikdash building looked like a T, right? The entranceway was long and narrow, and we'll call the primary building, which housed the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, was a rectangle. So the ulam is that top of the T. So the Mishnah said in that ulam, there were 2 tables, right? One of marble and one of gold. There's an alternate version. There's another brisa that says, no. It was one of silver, one of gold. And there was no table of marble. So the Gemara says, why does our Mishnah say marble and not silver? So the Gemara says, no, you don't use silver. Why don't you use silver? Because I will say silver, metal conducts heat. What's going to be the problem? If you go ahead and you put hot bread, it was hot bread, right? You put hot bread on silver, what's going to happen? Silver's going to get hot. We'll say what then ends up happening is if the table gets hot, it could lead to spoilage. Therefore, halacha l'maaseh, they did not use a silver table. They only used a marble table. Marble table. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. What's the problem? What are you talking about? You don't have to worry about the lechem hapanim. The lechem hapanim was already governed by miraculous activity. After all, again, one of the miracles in the Beis Midrash was what? That the lechem hapanim went onto the shulchan hot and it came off hot. So if that's the case, again, it was miraculous, and you don't have to worry about spoilage. To which the Gemara says, also listen to this. The Gemara says, Shnemar lasum lechem chom b'yomi lakho, Rabbi Shimon Levi Omer, ein maskirin ma'asen nisim. To which the Gemara says, we don't rely on miracles. You're right. I got it. The lechem hapanim was miraculous. But at the end of the day, when structuring your daily life in the Beis Hamikdash, you don't rely on a miracle. Therefore, you use a table of marble, not a table of silver. Which I will say, we'll have to stop over here. But what an incredible lesson. The Ribono Shel Olam performs miracles all of the time. And I know with absolute certainty that there are going to be miracles. But I cannot structure my life based on those miracles. My life must be structured around normative hishtadlus, normative human effort. But I live with the constant belief that I'm always going to see the Ribono Shel Olam's miracles. Therefore, our Mishnah says, you do not use a table of silver because that will lead to spoilage. I know there's going to be a miracle, but nevertheless, we go ahead and we use one table of marble, one table of gold. We will continue Hashem with the Shulchan tomorrow. Shkach, I will say.